This installment delves into fat, culture, and materiality. This book introduces us to fat, a substance that is ubiquitous yet rarely explored in depth. It has countless uses but is almost always met with contempt. So, how should we truly understand fat? Fat has always been a loaded word. On one hand, fat is indispensable. It forms our body tissues and plays a vital role in regulating body temperature, protecting internal organs, and aiding vitamin absorption. Beyond that, land rich in lipids signifies fertility and abundance. Deep-fried potato chips are crisp and delicious, and medicinal ointments using sesame oil as a solvent can heal burned skin without leaving a scar. On the other hand, fat is seemingly bad. The moment we hear the word, we think of bloated figures, unhealthy diets, and chronic conditions like hypertension and fatty liver disease. Moreover, an obese body is often labeled with negative qualities like laziness, greed, and even lechery. The book we are exploring today aims to shatter our stereotypes about fat and rebuild a comprehensive, multidimensional, and dynamic understanding of it. Co-authored by 10 international scholars from different fields, it examines Palestinian olive oil, American lard, the history of bias against fat, fat-themed works of art, and a range of social phenomena related to obesity. This book doesn't just look at what fat represents, it dives deeper to ask why it represents these things, and what the significance of these representations is. With that overview, I will now detail 4 core concepts. First, what is fat and what are its cultural meanings? Second, from a historical and cultural perspective, how did fat aversion take shape? Third, a look at today's diet crazes and the issue of anorexia. Fourth, a discussion of the extraordinary value of fat in art and contemporary medicine. Let's start with the first point. What is fat and what are its cultural meanings? You might think the answer is simple. The congealed grease on last night's leftovers, the fat on a cutting board, the love handles around our waists, and even the essential oils in aromatherapy or the lotion on our skin, isn't that all fat? Materially, yes. Fat is a triglyceride, composed of glycerol and fatty acids. While the glycerol structure is relatively stable, the number and types of fatty acids create the vast diversity of fats. This substance is widely present in our daily lives, performing all sorts of functions in various forms. We can hardly imagine how a world without fat would function. Beyond this, our understanding of fat has another dimension. The English word fat is also an adjective describing an obese or bloated state. This meaning is also reflected in a wealth of related terms that describe thickness, greasiness, and corpulence. At the same time, fat also connotes richness, smoothness, and luster, associated with concepts like fertility and opulence. Fat brings satisfaction to our taste buds, pleasure to our eyes, and the joy of abundance. It is a noun imbued with rich properties and infinite possibilities. So, how did this material substance become tied to so many cultural attributes? The connection is inseparable from its own diverse material properties. For example, fat can absorb and permeate other substances. Thus, people offered oil in temples, hoping it would absorb the blessings of the gods. They applied medicinal oils to their bodies, hoping the lipids would carry the healing properties inward to cure illness and avert disaster. Fat can also burn and produce smoke. For this reason, people lit eternal flames in temples, letting the rising smoke carry their prayers to the heavens and allowing the light and heat to bring guidance and comfort to their souls. Most importantly, fat provides energy for humans and animals. Therefore, fertile land and well-fed livestock were symbols of a prosperous household. Pregnancy and lactation require an adequate supply of fat, so full-figured women were once seen as having greater fertility. All of this illustrates that fat, through its diverse properties, alters the state of people and things. It is through this transformation that fat formed a stable association with profound concepts like religion, sanctity, wealth, and vitality, acquiring its rich cultural attributes. In short, the reason fat gained such a wealth of cultural meaning is rooted in its mutable and ambiguous material nature. Up to this point, you'll notice that humanity's original perception of fat was largely neutral, if not positive. But in today's mainstream Western culture, fat, and especially an excess of it, obesity is almost always met with scorn and disgust. Fat on the human body is seen as useless, superfluous, and disposable. The associations with obesity are overwhelmingly negative. A ruined figure, derivative diseases, and an image of laziness, weakness, foolishness, and a lack of self-control. In Henry IV, Shakespeare vilifies the obese Falstaff as a man-shaped cask of wine and a swollen parcel of dropsies. In Don Quixote, Cervantes describes the portly Sancho Panza as short-sighted and a gluttonous oaf. In Tartuffe, Molière also portrays the stout title character as a villain with a vile and ruthless heart. It's safe to say that in the cultural DNA of English speakers, a prejudice against fat is deeply ingrained. So, what exactly caused this systemic aversion to fat and obesity in Western culture? To solve this puzzle, we must look past the surface to understand its essence. The book's authors argue that the answer lies in three of fat's properties: its oiliness, its softness, and its dullness. Let's explore each one. First is oiliness, the greasy texture. In Western history, people have long used the word fertile to describe land. The method for judging soil fertility was intuitive. Rub it between your hands. Soil that didn't crumble but instead felt sticky and clung to the hands was considered fertile. This texture was reminiscent of the thick yet smooth feel of Greece. The ancient Greeks, Romans, and Hebrews all believed that fertile land was rich in fat, capable of producing more grain and feeding more livestock, thus representing greater wealth. For this, they held fat in high esteem. If that's the case, where did the aversion come from? First, there can be too much of a good thing. Overly fertile land can rot from an excess of organic matter, yielding no harvest. Similarly, overly obese women actually have lower fertility rates. Aristotle believed that in obese animals, the blood that should have been converted into sperm and eggs was turned into fat. The Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder also argued that excessively fat animals, both male and female, were more likely to be infertile and to age faster. Thus, fat became associated with infertility. More importantly, the substances that make soil fertile often include decaying matter and feces, things people find repulsive. From this, fat became linked to corruption. The term for overly fertile land, overgrowth, was later extended to describe the root of personal degeneracy and societal corruption in ancient Rome. Obese people were depicted as grotesque figures, sweating profusely, reeking, and oozing oil, as if their very flesh were decaying. In sum, the oiliness of fat explained agricultural abundance on one hand, but in excess it led to negative associations with infertility and decay. A quantitative change in fat led to a qualitative shift in how it was perceived. This view persisted through the Middle Ages and remains embedded in Western culture. The second characteristic leading to fat aversion is softness. Fat dulls the sharp edges of bones, making the body feel softer to the touch. In many cultures, a moderate plumpness was once a symbol of health, youth, and vitality. But the meaning of fat's softness didn't stop at tactile sensation through analogy. It became linked to feminine softness and even the softness of a climate. For instance, women are generally softer and more rounded than men, and Aristotle considered women to be naturally more passive and submissive. The Bible also suggests that woman is the root of corruption. Consequently, fat acquired cultural meanings of passivity, submission, and moral decay through societal prejudices against women. Furthermore, the ancients believed that climate and geography could shape a person's body and character. Hippocrates, the father of Greek medicine, wrote, "Where the land is rich, soft, and well-watered, the inhabitants are fleshy, ill-articulated, and lazy, and are cowards in their souls." This laxity was linked to indolence, effeminacy, corruption, and slowness, qualities implied by the Greek word for luxury, which also meant softness. This softness was the polar opposite of the hard, resolute ideal promoted by Greco-Roman culture. In classical literature, soft, flabby flesh was depicted as a sign of both physical and spiritual weakness, as if a person's spirit would become yielding along with their body. Because of this, obese individuals were often seen as docile, lesser forms of life. Plato once said, "It is entirely fitting that a lazy, weak, and fat animal should be trampled by another animal full of courage." In addition to oiliness and softness, The book highlights fat's dullness, its quality of being slow to sense. In Greco-Roman culture, fat was seen as a sluggish substance that could disrupt perception and thought. This view was based on the observation that many domesticated animals, with their restricted diets and movement, grew fat and appeared lethargic. Aristotle said, "If the whole body becomes fat, it will lose all sensation." Pliny the Elder concurred, "Greasy fat is without sensation. Most fat animals are dull." Based on these seemingly logical deductions, the concept of fat's dullness was effortlessly extended to human character. Obese people were thus assigned the image of being slow-witted and foolish. In Hebrew culture, fat was synonymous with a dull mind or a callous heart, and the term grease was extended to mean arrogance and selfishness. Beyond these three properties, there are other reasons for the aversion to fat. Aesthetically, obesity's impact on the body's form is obvious. Medically, high-fat diets and obesity signify high risk. Consumer culture has also pinned blame on the overweight. They consume more food and fabric, taking up more social resources. In recent decades, the so-called health industry, in its quest to sell products, has aggressively demonized fat, instilling a fear of obesity deep within everyone's psyche. To summarize, since ancient times, fat's three core traits, oiliness, softness, and dullness, led to it being progressively labeled with negative tags like corruption, submission, and stupidity. When these ideas were inherited by modern Western society, they combined with health and aesthetic concerns to form the deeply entrenched fat aversion and fat phobia of mainstream culture. Now that we've covered the causes, let's look at their specific manifestations in society. In American culture, it's common to infer a person's moral character from their weight. Obesity represents shame and guilt, a prejudice that is especially harsh for women. Obese women are often perceived as less intelligent, lazy, lacking in self-control, and even morally deficient. Their very existence is treated as an offense against standard feminine beauty. People may also link a fat woman's excess flesh with an insatiable appetite for sex and power. For obese women, this discrimination is everywhere. Not only do they feel uncomfortable in public, but even a trip to a department store to buy clothes can mean being relegated to a remote corner to find their size. Given this overt and covert discrimination, it's easy to understand why dieting is so popular among women and why the number of people with anorexia is growing. This brings us to our third topic, the dieting craze and anorexia. People believe that losing weight can change not just their appearance, health, and social life, but also directly improve their mental state and moral standing. As early as the 2nd century AD, the Roman physician Galen recorded one of the first cases of weight loss in his writings. Since then, the drama of dieting, fasting, purging, laxatives, and sweat-inducing methods has been playing out in human society for over 2,000 years. By the 19th century, with advances in medicine, obesity was widely considered a disease. Some people were willing to undergo surgery to lose weight. The famed tenor Luciano Pavarotti and soccer star Diego Maradona both had gastric bypass surgery. The growing aversion to obesity has also spawned a massive market. Media outlets worldwide eagerly exploit the audience's disgust with fat, using weight loss as a sensational hook. In 1988, Oprah Winfrey appeared on her talk show wheeling a wagon loaded with 67 pounds of animal fat to vividly showcase her own weight loss achievement. This powerful visual stimulus provoked a visceral revulsion to fat among viewers. Simultaneously, the show's ratings soared, celebrity endorsement fees climbed, and diet products flew off the shelves. By sensationalizing obesity, a great many people have made a fortune. When a culture's aversion to fat reaches an extreme, the emergence of anorexia is a logical consequence. Anorexia is an eating disorder linked to psychological factors, where patients have an intense fear of gaining weight. This leads to severe weight loss, often accompanied by malnutrition and endocrine disorders, and it has one of the highest mortality rates of any mental illness. For someone with anorexia, fat is a threefold threat. First, as a food, fat is dangerous and contaminating. They believe that even if they just put food in their mouth and spit it out, the fat will stick to the inside of their mouth and enter their body, making them gain weight. Second, anorexia becomes an excuse to avoid other problems in life. Gaining weight would mean they are cured, forcing them to confront those pressures again. Third, controlling their weight means controlling their life and identity. Gaining weight would signify total failure. In 1895, The Lancet reported the first known death from anorexia. At the end of the 19th century, Empress Sisi of Austria, renowned for her beauty, was also found to show signs of the disorder. More recently, Karen Carpenter, the famous singer of Yesterday Once More, ultimately died from anorexia. Fortunately, traditional Chinese culture does not hold so many negative views about obesity. When we see the Maitreya Buddha, we think of a person who is big-hearted and content. When we hear the expression plump yang and slender zhao, we understand that women of different body types each have their own beauty. However, it's undeniable that with the collision of Eastern and Western cultures, resistance to obesity is intensifying in China today. As the Pulitzer Prize-winning book The Body Project puts it, as many Asian nations have become westernized and been inculcated with Western standards of tall, slender, and thin beauty, a tsunami of eating disorders has engulfed them. Thus far, we've seen how in Western society, obese individuals, especially women, are consistently denigrated and discriminated against. This has fueled a persistent diet craze and a massive industry. When this culture is taken to its extreme, anorexia becomes increasingly prevalent. However, despite the ascendancy of fat's negative connotations in our time, we cannot ignore the rich potential and positive value it holds as an essential substance. In this final section, I will introduce two of its less-known applications, in art and in contemporary medicine. First, let's look at fat in art. The German artist Joseph Beuys, one of the most influential figures in postmodern European art, was famous for his extensive use of fat in his work. Among his series of pieces featuring fat as the primary material, the most renowned is Fat Chair. The work is deceptively simple. It is just an ordinary wooden chair with a wedge-shaped piece of lard placed on the seat. Yet this minimalist piece has sparked endless discussion. Some say the fat, which saved Bewies's life during World War II, relates to his personal history and symbolizes the warmth it provides. Others argue that because fat melts with temperature, destroying its original, regular shape, the work expresses chaos. Still others claim the artist used this surprising, even disgusting material to challenge rigid rationalism, as a way to reflect on the roots of the thinking that led to Nazism. In fact, Bewies's own explanation was quite simple. He said that fat is a material whose form is highly malleable but difficult to preserve. He chose fat, a substance so basic to life yet so distant from art, with the aim of stimulating a discussion about art itself and about human creativity. In Fat Chair, the role of fat is to spark the imagination. Besides Bewies, butter sculpture has been a popular tradition in the United States for over a century. Some say butter sculpture perfectly suits America's very fat, very wasteful character. Others claim that the shift in subject matter from opera figures to pop stars symbolizes the decline of American culture. From these artistic practices, we can see that what fat means depends entirely on the context in which it exists. Fat can be a waste product, but through artistic creation by virtue of its properties, its form, and the creativity of the artist, it stimulates the imagination, transforming from worthless trash into valuable art. Of course, beyond art, we more often hear about the applications of fat in medicine, primarily involving fat grafting and adipose-derived stem cells. Fat grafting, or fat transfer, is a technique where fat is moved from areas like the abdomen and thighs to other parts of the body that need filling. Over a century ago, surgeons began using a patient's own fat to enhance the shape of breasts. Today, this technique has become a primary method for breast reconstruction in cancer patients, offering an appearance and feel superior to artificial implants. It is also widely used in cosmetic procedures like autologous fat breast augmentation and facial fillers. Another revolutionary application of fat in medicine is with adipose-derived stem cells, hailed as the future of life. These stem cells are isolated from fat tissue, where they are found in extremely high concentrations, up to 2,500 times the amount in bone marrow. The harvesting process is simple and minimally painful, and the cells have the advantages of rapid proliferation and a low risk of rejection. Adipose-derived stem cells can differentiate into various cell types, including bone, cartilage, muscle, and nerve cells. They have led to breakthroughs in treating numerous diseases like ALS, multiple sclerosis, and myocardial infarction, as well as in anti-aging research. They may even hold the key to conquering all kinds of ischemic diseases. In September 2011, the world's first fat bank dedicated to storing fat was established in the United States. Here, fat is referred to as liquid gold. The fat bank encourages people to store their excess fat for future needs. The potential uses for fat in biomedicine are countless, while fat itself is readily available. Perhaps fat truly does represent one of humanity's ultimate dreams of creating life. This concludes our summary of the essence of fat, culture, and materiality. Let's review the book's core arguments one last time. First, fat is not only a widely used substance but also a concept rich with cultural meaning. It is associated with positive images like abundance and vitality, while its intrinsic properties also laid the groundwork for its later negative interpretations. Second, Western society's aversion to fat and fear of obesity stem primarily from fat's properties of oiliness, softness, and dullness, which linked it to negative concepts like corruption, submission, and stupidity. Third, this cultural bias has led to a persistent dieting craze, the flourishing of related industries, and severe social problems like anorexia. Fourth, despite its negative image, we cannot ignore the immense potential of fat. Whether it's sparking imagination in art or restoring life in medicine, fat demonstrates its immeasurable positive value. Congratulations, you've just finished another book.